1945, Salvador Dali reported to the Walt Disney Studio to begin work on a Surrealist cartoon. It would not be finished until 2003. This is the story of Destino. Dalí and Walt both knew they wanted careers in the arts from an early age. In 1921, at just 20 years old, Walt started his first animation studio, Laugh-O-Grams, where he and a small group of artists made short films based on fairy tales and advertisements for a local theater. When the studio went bankrupt in 1923, he moved to California and opened the Disney Brothers studio with his brother Roy. There he picked up where Laugh-O-Grams left off, with the Alice comedies. In 1927, he found success with Oswald the Lucky Rabbit and achieved his big break with Mickey Mouse, The Silly Symphonies, and eventually his first feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, in 1937. Dalí was born in Catalonia, Spain. In his early teens, he developed a talent for drawing and painting, holding his first hometown art exhibition in his teens. In 1925, at 21, he had his first solo exhibition in Barcelona. While in school, Dalí studied Freud and became fascinated with the symbolism of dreams, often interpreting his own. In 1929, after a solo show in Paris, the director of MoMA, Alfred Barr, and the art dealer Julian Levy took notice. Levy would purchase Dalí's The Persistence of Memory for $250, setting Dalí on the path to becoming the most famous Surrealist artist in the world. Though their approaches to art were very different, both men were deeply inspired by the places they lived. Many of Dalí's paintings drew on the landscapes and architecture of Portlagat, Spain. Likewise, a major source of inspiration for Walt was his boyhood home of Marceline, Missouri, which fostered his love of trains and inspired Disneyland's Main Street, USA. Walt wanted animation to be seen as more than just a novelty. He was constantly looking for ways to push the art form. He used his Silly Symphony shorts as testing ground for special effects that would later appear in his feature films, culminating in his most ambitious work, Fantasia. By the late 1930s, both men were considered icons and geniuses, each appearing on the cover of Time magazine. Walt first became intrigued with Salvador Dali in 1944 when he saw a book of the artist's work on animator Mark Davis's desk. Walt purchased a copy for himself and sent it to Dali with a request for a signature. Dali was interested in filmmaking and created 2 Surrealist films himself. He referred to Walt Disney as one of the great American Surrealists. The Disney Studio had already experimented with abstract animation in shorts like Bumble Boogie, Through the Mirror, and Pink Elephants on Parade from Dumbo. Dalí had been visiting the United States since the mid-1930s, but with the outbreak of World War II, he and his wife Gala left Europe and spent the next 8 years living in New York and California. The two would finally meet in August 1944 at a party hosted by Warner Brothers studio head Jack Warner. Dalí was living with Warner at the time while working on a Surrealist dream sequence for Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound. Walt, who spoke a little French from his time as a Red Cross ambulance driver during World War I, hit it off with Dalí immediately. The two discussed the possibility of collaborating on a film. In February 1945, Dalí and Gala moved from New York to the Hotel Del Monte in Monterey, California. From there, Gala wrote a letter to Walt on Dalí's behalf, saying, "Dalí is always thinking about the collaboration you spoke about." Walt was equally enthusiastic, and the two worked out a contract for Dalí to begin work at the studio. Dalí's official start date at the Disney Studio was January 15, 1946 through July 31st, with an option to extend to April 30th, 1948. His salary for this principal period was $17,909.09. Walt assigned versatile artist and future Imagineer John Hench to work side by side with Dalí. The two shared an office and desk space, creating concept art, storyboards, and backgrounds. Hench was the perfect artist for the job. He had worked in nearly every aspect of film production: story, layout, background painting, and special effects. He also spoke enough French to effectively communicate with Dalí. Hench described Dalí as unpretentious and genuinely enthusiastic about the project. He enjoyed coming into the studio and was as excited to work with Disney as they were to work with him. Dalí arrived between 8 and 8:30 a.m. The two would have lunch together, and they usually left between 5:30 and 7 p.m. Hench recalled that Dalí would come in every day with new ideas. They began developing the story, with Dalí suggesting ideas, sets, and concept sketches. Since Dalí had never worked in animation, Hench helped with continuity, figuring out how to transition from one scene to the next. A master draftsman, Hench adopted Dalí's sketching style when creating storyboards. Because Disney artists did not sign their work, Dalí sometimes couldn't tell his drawings from Hench's. The Mexican folk song Destino was selected as the soundtrack to the film. Walt had purchased the song during his Good Neighbor tour of Latin America in the early 1940s. Destino was sung by Dora Luz, who also appears in The Three Caballeros performing You'll Belong to My Heart. The song was originally intended for a live-action animation sequence. Luz recorded a demo version, but the proposed sequence was never made. Lyricist Ray Gilbert, who had written Zippity Doo-Dah for Song of the South, wrote the English-language version, titled My Destiny of Love. Walt suggested the song to Dalí, who loved the title and used it as the inspiration for the film. Dalí described it as a magical exposition of the problem of life in the labyrinth of time, while Hench referred to it as a ballet on the destiny of love. While the song and the inspiration came from Mexico, the art was unmistakably Dalí, incorporating some of his familiar subjects including clocks, telephones, bicycles, and ants. As the story began to take shape, Dalí started painting scenes and establishing shots using India ink and watercolor washes. Hench visited Dalí and Gala at their home in Pebble Beach one weekend to continue work. Gala later said that Hench was a perfect collaborator who truly understood Dalí. At one point, there was even a plan for Dalí to appear on screen to introduce the film and explain the symbolism. The film would be about the search for true love, with the various set pieces the female character encounters being distractions from her destiny, such as confusion, temptation, and social conflict. The male character Kronos searches for the girl, but they are separated by Dalí's surrealist labyrinth. Hench believed Dalí's use of baseball symbolized a form of ballet and freedom. The dancer's head became a baseball which Kronos hits into the temple of love, where it is caught by a catcher's mitt that transforms into a heart. Having spent most of the 1940s releasing package features, shorter, less ambitious films combining multiple stories such as Make Mine Music and Fun and Fancy Free, Disney's distributors were eager for a new feature-length film. Sensing this could mean the end of Destino, John Hench created a short animation test. Dalí painted on 2 pieces of celluloid, which Hench photographed over one of Dalí's backgrounds using the multiplane camera. It featured the 2 fate heads, which were modeled after Dalí and Gala, coming together to reveal a ballerina. Hench took the 17-second test to a local theater and screened it after hours. Only Dalí, Hench, the theater manager, and a custodian were present. Afterwards, the custodian asked, "What the hell was that?" Despite what the theater staff thought, Walt was thrilled with the test. Even with Walt's enthusiasm, this would be the only piece of film created for the original Destino. As production continued, Dalí began adding baseball imagery which Walt disliked. According to Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston, when Walt saw the concept art for the baseball sequence, he exclaimed, "Jesus Christ, $70,000 down the drain." When Dalí's contract ended in April 1946, he returned for another 6 weeks that summer and again from April 1947 to early 1948. After leaving the studio, Dalí continued to send Hench new sketches, paintings, and letters to Walt with more ideas for the short. In January 1949, Hench wrote to Dalí with an update. The studio was in financial trouble and had already begun a series of layoffs. The future of Destino depended on the success of the studio's next film, So Dear to My Heart. This was the last update Dalí would receive. Destino was shelved, likely due to its cost, the studio's financial strain, and concerns that Dalí's style was too far removed from Disney's. Whatever the reason, Walt later regretted not finishing the film. Despite Destino's cancellation, Walt and Dalí remained friends. Dalí and Gala visited Walt and Lillian Disney at their Carrollwood Drive home, where Dalí rode on Walt's backyard railroad, the Carrollwood Pacific. In a 1952 letter, Walt named Dalí vice president of the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad and sent him a membership card. Walt and Lillian visited Dalí and Gala in Spain, discussing potential projects such as adaptations of Don Quixote and El Cid. Dalí prepared story concepts, but the studio was shifting away from animation and more towards live action, television, and nature films. Walt's attention had turned to a new passion project, Disneyland. All of Dalí and Hinch's artwork was placed in the studio's morgue, a basement room under the ink and paint building where artwork was stored. Disney archivist Dave Smith described it as not as tidy as the studio version Walt's TV audience saw. The actual morgue was surrounded by leaky pipes and signs saying beware of the spiders. It was not the ideal place to be storing decades of what would now be considered priceless artwork. In 1969, a studio employee, Michael Hughes, from the art props department, stole over 130 pieces of Destino art from the morgue and sold them for $11,500. The artwork was later sold to a gallery for $20,000, and in an attempt to authenticate it, the new owners contacted Dalí, who reached out to Hinch. Hinch confirmed that the art had never been sold by the studio. After a legal battle, 130 pieces were returned to Disney in 1972. But Dalí's painted celluloids from Hinch's test footage were never recovered. It is not known how many pieces are still out there. Because the statute of limitations had expired, Hughes was not prosecuted for the theft. The recovered artwork was placed in a studio safe until 1970, when the Disney archives were established. Then later moved to the Animation Research Library, which now holds over 65 million pieces of art, including 150 from Destino. Dalí's death in 1989 renewed interest in Destino. Some suggestions included a book or a segment in a proposed Fantasia sequel. In 1998, Walt's nephew Roy E. Disney took special interest in the project. It was also included in the Disney That Never Was segment of Fantasia 2000. Roy championed the project's revival, and the studio agreed that the film should be finished. All remaining artwork was retrieved from the archives and scanned. John Hinch, then in his 90s, was brought back to consult on the film. Gala Dalí had compiled a notebook of conversations she had with Dalí on Destino. Though it created multiple possible interpretations, it helped the filmmakers capture Dalí's vision. Animation was assigned to Walt Disney Animation Paris under director Dominique Monferret. Initially unsure about tackling surrealism, Monferret studied Dalí's work and spent 4 months redrawing storyboards to better understand Dalí. Production began in 2001 with full animation underway by February 2002. The original Destino recording by Dora Luz was a worn 78 RPM record full of scratches. After much debate about re-recording, the team cleaned up the track, wrote a new orchestral score, and added a needle drop to the beginning. Dalí and Hinch had never given their lead characters facial features, so the animation team studied their drawings to design characters faithful to the original artwork. To match Dalí's style and make the film look more like a painting, character outlines were eliminated. Color and shadow would define form instead. Multiple techniques, including hand-drawn and 3D animation, digital painting, and Dalí's original backgrounds were combined to create a film unlike anything Disney had ever produced. Walt and Dalí's signatures were added to the opening credits. Walt's from an early Disney stock certificate, and Dalí's from his Disney contract. Destino appeared at the Annecy Film Festival in France in 2003, winning multiple awards and even earning an Academy Award nomination. John Hinch was pleased with the finished film, saying it achieved what he and Dalí had envisioned, though he noted one amusing error. Dalí's bicyclists had rocks on their heads, which the animators mistook for loaves of bread. Hinch passed away in February 2004, just 2 months after the film's premiere. While Destino is an interpretation of Dalí's ideas completed decades after his work on the project, it remains a monumental artistic achievement and a testament to the creative genius of both Salvador Dali and Walt Disney. Destino is available to stream on Disney+. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Disney history, please subscribe and follow us at Disney History Channel on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads.